The chill cut to the bone. The wind howled over the chasm like a giant bagpiper playing a funeral dirge. And then a piercing cry. Before we continue, tell us what city you're from, subscribe, hit like, and watch to the end. We're starting now. Mark Hayden was walking along a narrow mountain trail that snaked around snow-covered boulders. His breath formed white clouds in the frigid air. An hour ago, when he'd left the university nestled on the mountainside overlooking the Appalachian wilderness, an impenetrable darkness had already settled. It was now past midnight. He felt like a character in an old ballad, a lone traveler lost in a storm, unable to find his way home. "Why did I stay so late in the library?" he thought with irritation. Exams were long over, but his advanced wildlife behavior course wouldn't let him rest. The trail led to an old cabin where Mark rented a room during his studies. The place seemed cut off from the world. The mountains encircled the cabin like a jagged fortress wall, and only the moon watched as he crunched across the frozen crust of snow. "Blast," he muttered, hearing another sound, a soft, plaintive noise, like a mournful cry for help. He stopped, scanning the black expanse, trying to make out anything at all. The wind swayed the tops of the pine trees, and snow stung his face. Then that whimper again. "Who's there?" Mark called, squinting. The only reply was the rustling of branches and the quiet whisper of the blizzard. He stepped forward, and in the moonlight he noticed tracks. Small, but with clearly defined claws. They were filled with fine snow. The tracks ended abruptly in an uneven drag mark, as if the creature had barely been able to move its paw. Mark swallowed, feeling a surge of adrenaline. A wild animal? Injured? The thought flashed through his mind. He remembered his zoology professor's words. Animals are especially vulnerable in winter. One wrong step, and they're doomed. He followed the tracks for another 30 feet or so, and then he saw it. Half buried in a snowdrift was something dark. Mark saw a pair of eyes reflecting the moonlight. A bobcat. Young. Its fur was thick, but in the night's glow it appeared dull and matted. Its small body trembled. Its left hind leg jutted out at a strange angle. He couldn't believe his eyes. Bobcats were a rare sight in these parts, though the Appalachians were known for such predators. To see one so close and injured. "Easy, easy," Mark whispered, feeling his heart pound as he slowly approached. The bobcat didn't move. Perhaps it couldn't. It breathed heavily, thin ribs protruding beneath its fur. An open wound on its flank oozed blood, staining the snow crimson. "You're just a kit." Mark crouched down. The warmth of his body seemed to intrigue the animal. The bobcat's eyes were no longer frantic. It watched him, as if trying to understand if there was any hope. "I can't leave it here. It'll die," Mark thought. But what could he do? The local veterinary clinic was closed, and the nearest 24-hour one was miles away. He took off his coat, unfurled it, and carefully placed it over the bobcat. Then, making up his mind, he lifted it and held it against his chest. The bobcat hissed softly, but lacked the strength to resist. "Easy now. It's going to be okay," Mark spoke as if to a person, hoping his voice might soothe the injured creature. He headed towards the cabin, trying to tread carefully so as not to disturb the animal's hurt leg. The old cabin stood far from the village, nearly 3,000 feet above sea level. Sometimes it seemed the wind howled louder here than in the heart of the mountain pass. Inside, it had low ceilings and narrow hallways. Mark closed the door, shutting out the blizzard's wail. He placed the bobcat on a blanket spread near the stone fireplace. With trembling hands, he started a fire. Orange flames immediately filled the room with dancing shadows. "Thank the mountain spirits," he murmured softly as the fire took hold. The bobcat flinched, then lifted its head. Its enormous amber eyes stared directly at Mark. No aggression, no submission, just watchful waiting. "All right, let's take a look at those wounds." Mark rummaged in an old wooden cabinet where he kept a first aid kit. He sanitized his hands with rubbing alcohol, then carefully opened a packet of sterile gauze. He had to clean away the dried blood from the animal's fur to assess the severity of the injury. "Damn, where did you get a bite like that? A wolf?" he muttered, dabbing the wound with antiseptic. The bobcat tensed in pain, its hackles raised, but it didn't try to bite. It seemed all its energy had long since gone. "It's okay. Don't be scared." Mark said this more to himself. His hands were shaking. He still couldn't believe he was holding a wild bobcat in his home. While he was tending to it, there was a sudden knock at the door, a quiet tap, almost inaudible over the howling wind. "Mark, are you home?" It was Olivia's voice, a fellow student. He often saw her in lectures, especially those focused on Appalachian ecology. "Come in," Mark called, quickly covering the animal with the blanket. Olivia entered, shaking snow from her long chestnut hair. Her warm parka was dusted with frost. Seeing Mark kneeling before a bundle of fur, she froze. "Is that a bobcat?" she exhaled. "Where did it come from?" "Found it by the trail. Looks badly hurt. Can you help?" Olivia hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. She knew bobcats could be dangerous, but she saw that this one was barely breathing from pain and exhaustion. "Oh my, look at its leg." She touched the animal's hind limb, which was twisted at an unnatural angle. "It's not broken, more like dislocated, but there are scratches here. Looks like teeth marks." Mark stood up, casting a worried glance at her. "I doubt it was a human, maybe a wolf pack or a large dog." "We need to call Dr. Jenkins. He's the only one who knows how to handle predators." Olivia pulled out her cell phone. Reception was spotty in the mountains, but sometimes she got through. "Too late. He won't answer." Mark sighed. "We'll have to wait it out until morning." The bobcat twitched an ear a couple of times and whimpered plaintively, as if agreeing. Olivia wrapped it in a thick blanket. She also knew a thing or two about veterinary procedures. Last year, she'd helped volunteers at a fox rehabilitation center. "Should we get it something to eat?" she asked. "I have some chicken. It needs to be boiled," Mark replied, getting up. He nearly stumbled. His legs felt like jelly. "Thanks for stopping by. I couldn't have managed this alone." "No problem." Olivia caught her breath. "But you realize this is insane, right? Keeping a wild bobcat in your cabin?" "I know, but there aren't many choices. Either it freezes to death and bleeds out, or we at least give it a chance." Olivia nodded, looking into the wild eyes. She thought she saw a strange glint in those yellow pupils, as if an unknown power lurked within. At dawn, the blizzard subsided. The horizon painted itself in pale pink hues, and a deceptive calm settled along the entire mountain ridge, where light clouds hung. It seemed nature itself had exhaled after the night's fury. Mark stood on the porch, gazing at the snow. His old SUV was buried up to its doors. To think, yesterday evening, he could have driven it, but now he'd have to shovel it out first. "I need to get the animal to Jenkins as soon as possible, or I risk making things worse," he thought. massaging his stiff neck. He hadn't slept all night, checking the bobcat's breathing periodically, re-bandaging its wounds. Tracks were visible in the snow, large paw prints with long claws, very clear, as if someone had been walking around while the blizzard raged. Mark bent down, trying to figure out who might have left these prints. A wolf or a dog, he muttered quietly. Then he noticed another detail. There were human footprints nearby, too, but it looked as if someone had been running, then suddenly stopped. Or fallen? What the heck? Mark ran his fingers over the outline of a boot print, large size. Poachers? The thought flashed through his mind. Rumors circulated that a couple of illegal hunters operated in this area, hunting anything that moved. Footsteps sounded behind him. Olivia had also come out onto the porch. She saw Mark intently examining the snow. Find anything? Tracks, wolf or dog, and human, all mixed up. Maybe someone was looking for shelter last night, she suggested. Maybe. Mark looked around suspiciously. The snow already glittered in the first rays of sun. The silence felt too loud. But I don't like what I see. He went back inside. The bobcat, as if sensing the morning light, stirred quietly, emerging from a tired slumber. Mark cautiously approached it. "Well, Smoky," he said, suddenly choosing the name. Its smoky gray fur reminded him of a legend about a gray beast from Appalachian folklore. "Just a little longer, and we'll get you to the vet." The bobcat lifted its muzzle. Perhaps it didn't care what it was called, but it offered no objection. Meanwhile, Olivia found a rope carrier in the hall, resembling a large wicker basket lined with thick wool fabric. "Look, it can ride in here. We just need to make sure it can lie down and not bump against the sides." "Perfect. I'll start the engine and try to get down the road to the village." Mark noticed his hands were still shaking from worry. They carefully placed the bobcat in the carrier. The creature whimpered in pain when its hind legs shifted slightly, but it didn't resist. Mark covered it with a warm blanket. Then they exhaled, looking at each other, trying to mentally prepare for a 2 or 3 hour drive along winding, snow-covered roads. "Maybe I should come too," Olivia offered to help. "Absolutely. We'll take turns driving, and it's safer with 2 of us in case of anything." But when they went outside, they saw that the car's tires were helplessly stuck in a slushy snowdrift. They had to call for help from their neighbor, Old George, who lived a bit further up the trail. Old George the shepherd was short and wiry, with a gray mustache and an ever-present pipe in his teeth. When he saw the carrier with the bobcat, his eyebrows shot up. "Haven't seen one of these beauties up close in a long time. What happened to her?" "Found her injured," Mark replied. "We think wolves or dogs attacked her, but it could have been people." "People?" George grunted. "Strange types wander these mountains, and you know the legends yourself." "What legends?" Olivia asked, smiling as if she found it all nonsense. "Haven't you heard? About the spirit of the mountains that roams the passes in the form of a bobcat? They used to say if you met it in a blizzard, expect trouble." Mark frowned. He knew the Appalachians had many superstitions, but he didn't think people took them seriously. "You think it's a spirit?" he asked with a touch of irony. "I don't know, son, I don't know." George looked at the bobcat in the carrier. "But look how she's watching you. Don't worry, I'll help you push your vehicle out of the snowdrift." They spent half an hour shoveling snow and wedging wooden planks under the tires. The wind howled, and a sense of unease grew in Mark's chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching them from behind the trees. Finally, The car broke free from the snow's grip. Mark thanked the old man. George merely waved his hand and, shaking his head, blew a ring of smoke from his pipe. "Be careful. These mountains are not for those who don't respect their power," George said as a final word. The road descended in a series of switchbacks along sheer drops. The snow fell even harder, though an hour ago it had seemed the weather was clearing. The car was getting buried, and the wipers barely kept the windshield clear. "Mom always said mountain weather changes in an instant," Mark tossed out, clutching the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Do you think Smokey will make it?" Olivia turned to the back seat, where the Bobcat's carrier sat. "It has to. I tried to stop the bleeding, and our vet is excellent. Jenkins is a tough guy, but he knows his stuff." The car slid, and on one turn it almost veered into the ditch. Mark cursed. His nerves were frayed. "Hold on!" Olivia cried as the tires lost traction. With sheer willpower, Mark straightened the wheel, and they continued their journey, trembling from the adrenaline rush. From behind, the Bobcat let out a soft groan, as if sensing the full tension of the humans. When they finally descended to the dilapidated sign for Wild Animal Shelter, under which Jenkins was visible, the snowfall had turned into a full-blown blizzard. A lone lamp burned in the yard under a shed. Cages with mesh partitions stood nearby. Through the gloom, the silhouettes of other patients could be vaguely discerned. Foxes, a deer in a sling. "We're here," Mark sighed with relief, turning off the engine. They pulled out the carrier, carefully keeping it balanced so as not to cause the Bobcat any more pain. Icy gravel crunched underfoot. The shelter door opened, and Dr. Jenkins himself appeared on the threshold, a middle-aged, stocky man with a thick beard. He held a lantern. "Mark? Olivia?" he asked, surprised. "What the hell are you doing out here in this weather?" "We have an emergency." Mark gestured towards the carrier. "Come in." The vet stepped back into the hallway. "You can tell me on the way." Inside it was cool, but much warmer than outside. The ceiling lights flickered dimly, and the walls were adorned with photos of volunteers and rescued animals. Dr. Jenkins led them into the examination room. "Put it on the table," he said curtly. He opened the carrier and cast a quick, professional glance at the animal. Over his years of practice, he had seen everything. But a bobcat was not an ordinary house pet. "Young male, about 9 months old," Jenkins said quickly. "I'll know for sure after the examination. Where did you find him?" "By the trail, on the slope, injured, limping through the snow, barely dragging his leg," Mark explained. "I think he was attacked by wolves." Meanwhile, the doctor checked the bobcat's pulse and listened to its breathing. Olivia nervously clenched her gloved hands. "Hind leg is dislocated, not broken. That's good," Jenkins murmured. "The bite. Definitely a fang mark. A wolf or a large dog. Need to stitch up the flank. Blood loss isn't critical, but the animal is very weak, malnourished." "Is anything else threatening him?" Olivia asked. "Anything and everything, if he had been left in the forest without strength," the doctor shrugged. "But this way, he has a chance to recover." He looked at Mark. "Thank you for not leaving him to die. But from now on, it will be more complicated. A bobcat is a wild animal. You can't just keep him at home. Official procedures need to be followed." "I understand," Mark sighed, lowering his gaze. "We'll do everything we can," Jenkins said, gently stroking the animal's scruff with his gloved hand. "You two can fill out the paperwork in the meantime." A week passed. The blizzard gave way to a thaw. The Appalachian slopes, covered in snowcaps, looked like an enchanted kingdom. But life at the shelter continued, routinely and not without its challenges. Mark visited Dr. Jenkins almost every day after classes. Olivia sometimes joined him, but more often he was alone. Smoky, as the animal was named in the records, was slowly recovering. The stitches held, his leg began to heal, and the bobcat could now carefully stand, putting weight on the injured limb. "Look, he doesn't growl when he sees you," Jenkins noted, examining the animal before its evening shot. "He seems to have gotten used to me," Mark smiled. "But he tolerates Olivia, too." "Yes, but with us, he sometimes growls when he sees unfamiliar volunteers. So be careful. A wild heart beats in his chest. Don't forget." Mark nodded, moving closer to the cage and crouching down. Smoky met his gaze. In those amber eyes shimmered curiosity, perhaps something akin to trust. Or maybe it was just an illusion. "Hey there, buddy. How's your leg?" Mark spoke softly, almost a whisper. The bobcat twitched an ear. He recalled how, that night, when he found Smoky, he believed he was seeing not just an animal, but some embodiment of the mountain spirit. He himself didn't believe in mysticism, but in the Appalachians, many things change in a person's perceptions. "Heard you and Olivia are researching the legend of the phantom bobcat?" Jenkins asked, interrupting his thoughts. "Oh, that—" Mark was a little flustered. "No, not really. Olivia's just curious. She wants to write an article about local folklore. I sometimes help with the material." The doctor chuckled. "People always want to add mystery, but there's logic to everything. Sometimes a bobcat or a wolf might seem like a spirit. If you're alone in a blizzard in the middle of the forest and you see their shimmering eyes." "Agreed, though in such moments you start believing anything," Mark sighed. At that moment, the shelter door opened. Gregory stood on the threshold. Mark's friend from university, a slender guy known for his love of spooky stories. "Hey," he said, pulling off his hat and shaking snow from his curly hair. "Came to see your critter?" "Hi, come on in," Mark nodded, leading him to the cage. Gregory whistled when he saw the bobcat. Smoky tensed, flattening his ears, but there was no growl. "Now that's a beauty. Say, have you heard the tale about the bobcat that supposedly led people into the mountains and they disappeared without a trace?" Gregory asked in a semi-whisper. "Ha ha ha, no, I haven't. Let's skip the scary stories." Mark tried to change the subject so as not to agitate the animal. Gregory just shrugged. But then, when Jenkins was distracted, he quietly said, "They say in these parts, if you hear a soft growl outside your window at night, it means the phantom bobcat is hunting for your soul." Mark remained silent, only sighing heavily. He knew Gregory loved to scare people with such stories. But for some reason, after meeting Smoky that night, Mark sometimes found himself thinking, deep down, what if there's something to these legends after all? Time passed. Smoky's leg healed, the wound on his flank closed. He ate meat provided by volunteers, sometimes commercial wild animal feed. Mark continued to visit daily, sometimes feeding him, sometimes just sitting nearby, talking about his plans, though he knew the animal barely understood him. One night, Mark had a terrible dream. He was running through a dark forest, tree roots snagging his feet, and behind him, a piercing howl. Suddenly, he saw a bobcat standing on a snow-covered rock. The bobcat looked at him and disappeared. Only bloody tracks remained in the snow. Damn! Mark woke up in his room, fists clenched. His heart pounded like mad. Moonlight streamed through the windows. Time to rest. I'm overstressed, he told himself. Nevertheless, a sense of unease lingered. The next day, when he arrived at the shelter, a new incident had occurred. One of the foxes kept in an enclosure was found dead. The fur on its scruff had been ripped out, teeth marks. Jenkins was in shock, examining the gate to the enclosure, which, for some reason, was ajar. Poachers? Or did some animal manage to get in? Mark asked. I don't know. Jenkins was pale. But there are no signs of forced entry. Maybe one of the staff forgot to lock it. Or he trailed off, looking grim. In any case, we'll have to increase security. This mystery immediately sparked a flurry of rumors among the volunteers. Some spoke of a wolf that had broken through the fence. Others whispered about a curse. What if the bobcat rebelled? Some murmured. But Mark knew Smoky hadn't escaped. His cage was locked, and the animal was still limping, though he was now standing on all fours. It wasn't Smoky. He can barely move, Mark said firmly. Nevertheless, an uneasy tension hung in the air. When Smoky had fully recovered, the question arose of what to do next. Dr. Jenkins suggested releasing the animal into the wild as soon as the weather softened. But official permits from Wildlife Services were required. Besides, there was a risk that Smoky had forgotten how to hunt on his own. Perhaps it makes sense to keep him under observation in a reserve, Mark mused aloud. He was sitting in the shelter's break room, sipping hot mint tea. Opposite him, Olivia, leafing through papers, nodded. We don't have enclosures that large, and the doctor says a bobcat should be free. He's right, but... Mark paused, looking toward the cage where Smoky dozed, his fur bathed in a weak sunbeam. I'm worried he won't survive if the wolf pack that injured him is still out there. Or if there are poachers who hunt bobcats, Olivia added. Gregory appeared at the door. Heard the news? Traps were found in the next canyon over. Someone clearly wanted a bobcat pelt. Mark blanched. So our suspicions about poachers weren't unfounded. It seems not. Gregory cast a worried look at the cage. Be careful. If those scumbags find out about Smoky, they might specifically hunt him. A chill spread through Mark. The image of the bloody snow and the animal's faint breathing flashed in his memory. Not this, he thought. At one of the village houses, where a folklore fair was being held, Olivia found an old book describing beliefs about the gray beast that brought tidings of change. She copied interesting passages and brought them to Mark that evening to discuss. Listen, it says here that if a person saves an injured bobcat on a night of a fierce storm, a special bond forms between them. It can protect him, or sometimes, on the contrary, bring misfortune if the person shows cowardice or malice. Sounds romantic, Mark mumbled with a smirk, but I don't believe in such fairy tales. And yet I can't shake the feeling that you're not just saving a wild animal. Perhaps this is a test from the mountains. Olivia, enough, he said quietly, recalling all the strange coincidences of the past few weeks. The fox's death, the tracks found, the traps. I'm going to save Smoky because it's the right thing to do. The rest doesn't matter. Olivia smiled. Mark returned the smile, but weariness showed through it. University exams were over, but instead of resting, he was bogged down with worries about the bobcat. A new snowy night fell. Mark again stayed at the shelter, helping the duty volunteer distribute food. At some point, he heard strange sounds outside, like metal clanging against wood. "What's that?" he muttered, pulling on his jacket. Stepping outside, he saw someone in a dark hood tinkering with the fox enclosure. As he appeared, the figure dropped something to the ground and bolted. Mark chased after them, but tripped on ice and fell, hitting his side. "Hey, stop!" he yelled into the emptiness. Only a muffled echo answered. When he returned to the enclosure, he noticed scattered pieces of wire and a small pouch on the snow. Inside the pouch were dry meat scraps, soaked in some putrid liquid. Poison! He realized with horror. Someone wanted to kill the animals without risking an encounter with security. Poachers? The thought flashed through his mind. He raised the alarm. Jenkins and the volunteers scoured the shelter grounds but found no one. Smoky was safe and sound. Mark checked on him first. The bobcat had huddled in the far corner, but at the sight of a familiar face, it stopped hissing. "It's okay. I'm with you," Mark whispered, listening to the wind howl again in the night. After this incident, Jenkins realized that keeping the young bobcat here was unsafe. Smoky either needed to be transferred to a more secure wildlife sanctuary or released into the wild, with his adaptation monitored. "I think he's ready for freedom now," the doctor sighed, displaying the results of the last examination. "His leg has healed. He walks without a limp." "And his hunting skills?" Mark inquired, nervously fiddling with the zipper on his jacket. "Instincts haven't gone anywhere. He's young, strong. Yes, he'll still have a tag and the option for supplementary feeding if needed, but overall this is the best option." Mark fell silent. He understood it was the right thing to do, but his heart ached at the thought of parting. "All right. When?" he finally asked. "Tomorrow morning," Jenkins replied curtly. Olivia was present during this conversation and placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. "It'll be okay. After all, it's a wild bobcat, not your house cat." "I know," he mumbled, trying to hide his emotions. All evening, they prepared a special GPS collar for Smoky, small, lightweight, to track his movements. Jenkins arranged with a park ranger from the local preserve for feeding stations to be set up there. "While the poachers are actively being sought, you little beast will have to be careful," Mark said, looking at the bobcat, who was listlessly stretching in its cage. Night fell. The last night Smoky would spend at the shelter. Mark stayed on the floor near the cage to be close. He felt tiredness and worry mingle in his soul. "You know, I originally came to the Appalachians just to study," he said quietly, as if confessing to the animal. "But you changed my life. Seriously, I've never before felt such responsibility for someone's fate." The bobcat half opened its eyes. They gleamed softly in the dim light. Perhaps it sensed it would soon leave, or perhaps it was simply curious why the human was speaking to it in such a heartfelt tone. Morning in the mountains was strikingly quiet. The sky was clear, and the cold sun lit the snowy hills. Mark and Olivia loaded the cage with the bobcat into Jenkins' car. Gregory stood nearby, helping to close the doors. "Hope everything goes smoothly," he said, holding a bag of provisions. "If you see anything strange out there, well, you know." "Gregory, spare me your ghost stories," Mark cut him off, getting into the passenger seat. They drove high into the mountains, where the protected area began beyond a pine forest. The ranger, a stocky man named Andrew, was already waiting for them in a cleared glade at the foot of a rocky ridge. "What a beautiful spot," Olivia remarked, getting out of the car. Fresh snow crunched underfoot. All around them were majestic pine trees, glinting with frost, and light reflecting from the snowy peaks. Smoky behaved calmly, only occasionally hissing when someone opened the cage too abruptly. Dr. Jenkins considered this a good sign. His protective instincts were awakening. "Ready?" Andrew asked. "Yes," Mark nodded. The cage was placed on the snow. The door was opened. The moment everyone had been waiting for arrived, but no one realized how unsettling it would be. Smoky cautiously poked his nose out. He took in the frosty air, took a step onto the snow. He winced, as if unsure of his treated leg. Then another step. Mark's heart pounded like it did on his first paragliding flight. "Come on, buddy. This is your life," he whispered softly. The bobcat froze, looking back. For a moment their eyes met. There was so much strength and freedom in that gaze that Mark felt a lump in his throat. He felt everything inside him scream, "Don't go!" But he knew it was selfish. Smoky bolted forward lightly, almost silently, and disappeared into the dense spruce thickets. Only a clump of snow fell from a branch, and then all was quiet. "That's it," Jenkins said, sighing with relief. "Now nature itself will decide his fate." Mark looked at the white expanse of the forest. Emptiness and joy mingled within him. "Bon voyage, my friend," he mentally addressed Smoky. 2 weeks later, life returned to its usual rhythm. Mark attended lectures, prepared for practicals, and began his thesis on Appalachian wildlife. Olivia was writing an article about local beliefs. Gregory entertained everyone with new tall tales. Meanwhile, Jenkins occasionally reported that the collar was tracking the bobcat's movements in the Rocky Plateau area. It seemed Smoky had settled in. "Is he eating? Is he hunting on his own?" Mark asked when he visited the shelter on the weekend. "Looks like it, yeah. I'm tracking him on the map. He moves around quite a bit. Bobcats usually don't range so widely, but he's probably establishing his territory," the doctor replied. "And the poachers?" "Quiet for now. Probably lying low after that incident when you and Olivia almost caught them. The sheriff's department is also looking for leads." Mark wanted to be happy, but deep inside, a nagging thought persisted. What if they haven't given up? That evening Gregory called him. "Listen, I've got news from George. They say he found predator tracks close to the village, and next to them, a couple of boot prints. Could your Smoky be in trouble again?" "I hope not," Mark frowned. "Send me the coordinates. I'll go check." Driving there the next morning, he wandered in the forest's edge for a long time, but found nothing but old paw prints and blurred human boot tracks. Another week passed. One evening, as the sun was setting behind the mountains, Mark decided to walk around the very spot where he had first met Smoky. There was a little less snow, and patches of ground were beginning to appear. He walked, lost in thought, when he suddenly heard a crackle of branches. A figure in a green jacket emerged from behind a tree. Mark gasped in surprise, and the stranger sharply raised a rifle. "Stop! Who goes there?" he hissed. "Easy! I'm just a student." Mark's hands flew up. The man lowered his rifle, looking him over with a grim face. "I'm hunting coyotes out here. They've multiplied, you know. I've got a license." Mark gritted his teeth. The man didn't inspire trust. A smirk on his face, shifty eyes. "I don't believe he's a legitimate hunter," he thought. "Haven't seen a bobcat around here?" The hunter narrowed his eyes. "No. Why would there be one?" Mark tried to speak without a tremor. The stranger smirked. "Just asking. If you see one, let me know. I'll pay a bit. Worth good money." Rage boiled inside Mark. These are the poachers, he realized, but he didn't show it, only shrugged. All right, if I see anything, I'll let you know, he lied. The man walked away, dissolving into the evening twilight. Mark was left with a wildly pounding heart. He knew Smoky wasn't entirely safe. Mark warned Jenkins and the ranger that he had seen a suspicious man with a rifle. They agreed to conduct a patrol, but the mountains were vast, and it was impossible to check everywhere. One night, the phone rang at Mark's cabin. On the other end was a frantic Olivia. "Mark, you have to see this. Smoky's tracker is moving towards the village, and fast. Is he injured, or is someone chasing him?" Mark grabbed his phone and checked the GPS app they'd set up with the doctor. The dot was indeed moving surprisingly quickly down the slope. "I'm coming," he said into the receiver. Half an hour later, Mark was rattling along the mountain road, constantly glancing at the screen. The dot was getting closer to the edge of the village. Finally, he got out. His headlights cut across a snowy field. In the distance, scattered streetlights glowed, and shadows danced on the ice. "Smoky?" he called, walking through the snowdrifts. His own voice sounded ridiculous. He knew the bobcat wouldn't run to him like a tame cat. But the situation was critical. Through the gloom, he made out a silhouette that looked like a small animal. It limped towards an old wooden fence. Mark's heart clenched. His leg again? "Someone's there," a voice called from the side. Gregory ran up with a flashlight, followed by Olivia. "Do you see him? Is he hurt?" Olivia whispered. "I don't know." Mark approached. But when their light fell on the animal, it turned out not to be Smoky. It was an old fox, utterly weakened. "It's not him," Mark exhaled in disappointment. "Damn it, where's the bobcat?" And then, in the distance, a sharp gunshot rang out. The echo bounced off the mountain wall, making them freeze. "It's over there, closer to the creek." Gregory pointed. They dashed off. Mark had probably never felt such primal terror for a creature he cared so much about. By the bank of the mountain creek, chaos reigned. 3 men with rifles. One apparently the same hunter Mark had encountered earlier. Snow was scattered, and in the faint moonlight, the silhouette of a bobcat was visible. "Get him!" one of the men yelled, trying to take aim. The bobcat hissed, leaping to evade a shot, but was clearly in distress, limping, likely from an injury. Mark rushed forward without thinking. "Leave her alone!" he shouted. Olivia and Gregory, lagging slightly behind, saw everything unfold in mere seconds. One of the poachers turned, raising his rifle. "Who the hell are you? Get lost before it's too late!" Mark lunged at him, trying to knock him down. The weapon fired into the air. The echo reverberated through the canyon. Smoky, taking advantage of the momentary distraction, darted aside, leaped onto a riverside rock. But due to his injured leg, he lost his footing and fell into the icy water. "No!" Olivia cried, running closer. The river churned, carving its path through icy flows. The poachers were stunned by Mark's audacity and didn't immediately know what to do. "You fool! You could have gotten killed!" the hunter snarled, trying to re-aim. But then a new voice rang out. "Hold it! Drop your weapons!" It was Andrew, the ranger, and 2 other game wardens with him. They had arrived just in time. They had taken cover on a small hill and were holding the trespassers at gunpoint. The poachers dropped their rifles. "Lucky for us," one of them grumbled. Mark rushed to the edge of the bank, peering into the raging current. Smoky had vanished. Only dark waves crashed against sharp rocks. "Smoky!" he cried, though he knew he wouldn't be heard. "Damn it!" Olivia grabbed Mark's shoulder. "We need to look downstream. The river isn't too deep. Maybe he managed to swim out." "I'm with you," Gregory volunteered, his face tense. Andrew and the game wardens detained the poachers. The barking of dogs and the roar of the wind merged into a hellish cacophony. Descending along the bank, Mark risked his life. Slippery rocks, sharp ice floes, but instinct seemed to guide him. He ran, looking over every overgrown bush, every ledge. "Smoky!" he called out. His voice was hoarse. "Something's there!" Gregory yelled, pointing to a gap in the ice. The water there churned, and in the moonlight a dark mass splashed. Mark jumped across the rocks. Olivia helped pull him up. Gregory shone his flashlight. They saw the bobcat's silhouette on a small ledge just above the waterline. Smoky shivered, his fur soaked, his hind leg tucked in. "He's alive!" Olivia gasped. Mark cautiously approached. The bobcat hissed at the sight of him. Panic and fear gripped the animal, but still it didn't try to run away. "Easy, buddy," Mark whispered, taking off his jacket. "I'm with you." He moved slowly, overcoming the sharp pain in his knee. Bruised during the struggle with the poacher, he covered Smoky with his jacket, trying to warm him. The bobcat barely resisted, too exhausted after the icy water and injury. "We need to get him out of there," Gregory said, leaning down. Together they lifted the animal and carefully carried him to the bank. Every muscle in Smoky's body trembled. Mark felt the bobcat's heart pounding frantically under his hands. "We need to take him to Jenkins." Olivia quickly checked the animal's pulse in its neck. "He's severely hypothermic." The ranger found them and helped them reach the nearest road by snowmobile, where transport was already waiting. That night the Appalachians seemed harsh and gloomy, but Mark was grateful they had at least arrived in time. At the shelter, Jenkins once again set to work with frenetic energy. Dusk was gathering, and he and his assistants were doing everything to save the hypothermic animal. Smoky's old stitches on his leg had reopened, and his overall condition was critical. "There's a chance, but it's small," the doctor said, wiping sweat from his brow. "But the poachers were caught. Thank God!" Mark stood against the wall, fists clenched, feeling helpless. Olivia supported him, stroking his back. Gregory remained grimly silent, looking at the bobcat's ice-encrusted collar. "I told you, it's fate," he finally whispered, seeing Mark clench his jaw. "No time for talk of mysticism," Mark snapped. Internally, he no longer knew what to believe. He only wanted one thing: for the animal to live. The hours crawled by agonizingly slowly. The entire team fought for the bobcat's life. Morphine for pain relief, antibiotics, heating pads, IV drips. By morning, he was in a deep sleep, but stable. "I think we pulled him back from the brink," Jenkins exhaled, collapsing into a chair from exhaustion. "Thank you, Doctor." Mark approached, wanting to shake his hand, but only managed to pat him on the shoulder. A lump formed in his throat. The next day, Smoky came to, opening his eyes. His leg was bandaged, an IV drip was attached, and volunteers bustled around. At the sight of Mark, the animal slightly lifted its head and bumped its forehead against the cage bars, as if wanting to come closer, but remembering that the human was not an enemy. "Hey there, buddy." Mark sat down beside him. "You did it. You won again." At that moment he realized that everything that had happened over the past few months was not just a chain of random events. It was a journey, and its end had not yet come, because Smoky was alive, which meant there would be a continuation. "The poachers are in custody," Gregory announced, appearing at the doorway. "I heard from the ranger. It's a gang that's been operating in the area for a long time. So Smokey has nothing to fear now." "Nothing but his own wildness," Jenkins added with a smile. "When he recovers, we'll release him again, but to a different, safer place." Mark looked up at the ceiling as if thanking the mountains for their mercy. The legend of the gray beast flashed in his memory. If you save a bobcat in a storm, it will always return to test your faith. Perhaps that was the whole point. He didn't want to believe in mysticism, but deep down he felt this was not just a coincidence. Spring in the Appalachians arrived unexpectedly. The snow began to melt, exposing the dark earth. Torrents of water churned in the riverbeds. Dr. Jenkins arranged with a large sanctuary in another region where the bobcat could live without the threat of poaching. Several more weeks passed, Smokey fully recovered, and then came the day of his new freedom. Mark was no longer bubbling with anticipation. He knew it was all for the animal's good. "We'll take him there," Jenkins said. "They have a bobcat protection program, and the staff have set up good territories." "I think I won't go," Mark whispered when everything was ready. He knew that if he saw the animal leave, his heart would ache again. "Are you sure?" Olivia asked, coming up to him. "Yes. Let him go without me. I did what I could, and now he'll decide how to live his life." They stood on the shelter porch, watching the car with Smokey inside slowly drive away down the road. Gregory clapped Mark on the shoulder. "It'll be all right, buddy. Maybe in 10 years you'll see an article in the papers about a rare bobcat living in the sanctuary, and you'll recognize your Smokey in it." Mark nodded, but said nothing. Inside, there was a quiet joy and sadness simultaneously. Few would understand what it meant to save a wild animal. Few would realize that on that night, when the snow stung his skin and the wind howled between the cliffs, the bond between them was not forged for just one day. Some stories never end, he thought. Even if paths diverge, the memory of the miracle remains. The wind ruffled his hair, and in the distance the Appalachian peaks shimmered as if watching over the whole world. And somewhere there, beneath the canopy of pines, in the shadow of shaggy evergreen branches, a bobcat named Smokey found its freedom again and continued on its way. That evening, Mark sat by the small fireplace in his room. The gentle thaw rustled outside his windows. He thumbed through the notes he had taken during Smokey's rescue, a list of dates, procedures, medications, and at the end a handwritten note. "The bobcat went to the mountains, but the spirit of the mountains stayed with me." He smiled. His soul was at peace, as after a long journey. Something told him that great things awaited him, and outside, in the black sky, like someone's amber eyes, the stars twinkled. Thus the story ends, but does not conclude, for in the legends of the Appalachians it is said, "As long as the gray beast roams the mountains, there will always be someone among people who is not afraid to lend a helping hand." Thank you for watching. What do you think of this story? Share your thoughts. Your comment is very valuable to us.